In the shadowed corners of memory and folklore, where the veil between the seen and unseen thins, lie tales that resonate with a chilling authenticity. This exploration delves into such accounts, drawn from the heart of rural Vietnam, specifically the region known as Long Kieng, during a period spanning the tumultuous decades of the 1930s to the 1950s. These are not intended as whimsical fables concocted for entertainment, but rather as narratives presented with the gravity of genuine experiences, documented and passed down through generations. They offer a unique, often unsettling window into a time and place where the boundary between the mundane world and the realm of the supernatural felt porous, almost immediate. Chroniclers like Lo Hong Mia, whose work includes the notable collection titled Night of Horror, played a crucial role in preserving these fragments of local belief and perceived history. Through such efforts, these stories, imbued with the weight of lived experience and recounted as truth by those who purportedly endured them, serve as our gateway into a world steeped in mystery, hardship, and profound fear. Long Kieng Village, though situated geographically close, merely 70 or 80 kilometers, from the increasingly vibrant, French-influenced hub of Saigon, existed psychologically and culturally in a world apart during those mid-century decades. It represented a pocket of deep countryside characterized by its enduring rustic simplicity and a stark, palpable isolation. One must picture a landscape dramatically different from the city's nascent sprawl. Houses were few and far between, often simple structures of thatch and wood, separated by vast, open tracts of rice paddies and untamed fields stretching towards an often indistinct horizon. Life unfolded along, and was often dictated by, a complex network of numerous canals and smaller waterways. These were fringed by dense mangrove bushes, their tangled roots gripping the muddy banks, alongside towering mangrove trees and thickets of water coconut palms that leaned over the murky water. This labyrinth of waterways served not just as a geographical feature but as the essential circulatory system of the community, providing transport, irrigation, and sustenance, while also acting as natural boundaries. The very air often carried the distinctive, mournful cries of bitterns, sounds that seemed intrinsically linked to the rhythm of the tides, the slow rise of high water, the quiet stillness of full water, echoing across the flatlands and amplifying the inherent wildness and untamed spirit of the place. It was undeniably a setting where nature exerted an immense, enveloping presence, a force that was simultaneously the community's provider and a constant reminder of potential, unseen threats lurking within its depths. The inhabitants of Long Kieng during this era were inextricably bound to the land, their existence governed by the unyielding cycles of planting and harvest. Agriculture formed the bedrock of their society, a demanding life tethered intimately to the whims of weather and season. Families considered relatively prosperous might possess a pair of sturdy water buffaloes, indispensable partners in the arduous task of tilling the flooded paddy fields. They might also raise a few essential pigs, alongside flocks of chickens and ducks, vital sources of protein and occasional income. For the vast majority, however, simple subsistence farming rarely provided enough. Survival frequently necessitated supplementing their meager daytime earnings, often compelling villagers to venture out under the concealing cloak of night. As dusk bled into darkness, many would take to the darkened fields and waterways, their flickering lamps casting small pools of light in the immense blackness. They sought extra income by catching shrimp and fish navigating the canals, or hunting for the frogs abundant after rains. These nocturnal harvests, crucial for household economies, would then require further effort, often arduous journeys undertaken on foot before dawn, to reach the markets of nearby Saigon, or perhaps sold more locally amongst neighbors and friends. This enforced, constant interaction with the nocturnal world, this necessary immersion in the profound darkness far beyond the reassuring glow of household lamps, inevitably shaped their worldview, fostering a deep respect for the night's power and perhaps making them acutely sensitive, even vulnerable, to experiences that defied easy explanation. To fully appreciate the resonance of these ghostly narratives, one must acknowledge the specific temporal and cultural context from which they emerge. The language employed within these tales, the particular sayings, the idiomatic turns of phrase, the cadence of speech, is intrinsically of the mid-20th century in this specific region of southern Vietnam. Passing references might be made to local figures, perhaps a Mrs. Phu or a Nam Co, individuals known within the community fabric, or the dialogue might employ expressions and ways of speaking that feel quite distinct, possibly even archaic, to contemporary understanding. These linguistic elements are far from mere superficial details. They are woven into the very fabric of the narratives, reflecting the unique perspectives, social norms, and cultural milieu of the people who lived, experienced, and shared these unsettling stories. Grasping their significance requires a degree of sympathetic engagement from the audience, an acceptance of this specific vernacular not just as flavor, but as a key part of the account's claim to authenticity, encoding the mindset of the era. Central to this entire exploration is the recurring theme of supernatural encounters. Crucially, these are presented within their original context not as allegorical myths or symbolic legends, but as factual reports, testimonies from individuals recounting events they perceived as real. Our approach mirrors this perspective. We examine these accounts as pieces of recorded folklore, reflecting the deeply held beliefs and the perceived realities of the Long Kieng community during that specific historical period. Themes of intense fear, profound isolation, and the pervasive sense of an unseen world lurking just beyond the periphery of the known are constants throughout these narratives. The darkness, in this context, represented more than a simple absence of light. It was understood as a different kind of realm, one where shadows could coalesce into tangible forms, where familiar landscapes could abruptly become treacherous and disorienting, and where encounters with entities beyond ordinary human comprehension were not just imagined, but were whispered about in hushed, fearful tones, warnings and shared experiences binding the community. It's noteworthy how often these narratives unfold during solitary ventures, particularly after nightfall. This isolation starkly emphasizes the vulnerability of the individual when pitted against the vast, indifferent backdrop of the natural world and the potential, terrifying intrusion of the spectral. This work, therefore, will delve into specific, detailed narratives drawn from this rich vein of regional folklore, focusing primarily on the harrowing experiences attributed to two particular villagers as they navigated the treacherous nights endemic to Long Kieng. We will follow their documented journeys step by step, tracing the escalating trajectory of fear and the bizarre, often terrifying events they reportedly faced. Through the lens of their recounted experiences, we witness the stark collision of the ordinary, the familiar routines of farming, the necessary nocturnal hunt, or the pre-dawn journey to market, with the extraordinary, the inexplicable, and the deeply unsettling. Examining these core stories in detail, presenting the sequence of events and the chilling specifics as they have been preserved through oral and written traditions attributed to Le Hom Mia, allows for an immersive understanding. It is, in essence, an invitation to step back across the decades, into the palpable atmospheric intensity of rural Vietnam nearly a century ago, and to confront the ghostly folklore that so profoundly permeated the lives and anxieties of its people. The unique, isolated, and often unsettlingly eerie nature of Long Kieng after sundown undeniably provided fertile ground for such unexplained occurrences. To truly grasp the chilling weight of these experiences, one must first appreciate the common, yet potentially perilous, nocturnal activities that formed the very backdrop against which these terrifying spectral dramas played out. One common nocturnal activity, essential for survival yet fraught with unseen risks in the waterlogged landscape of mid-century Long Kieng, was frog hunting. For many villagers, whose lives were a constant struggle against the limitations of subsistence farming, the darkness offered an opportunity to supplement their meager incomes. The fields and canals, teeming with life after the frequent rains, became hunting grounds where valuable protein could be gathered and later sold. This practice, born of economic necessity, was deeply ingrained in the rhythm of rural life, particularly during specific seasons or after significant downpours which brought the amphibians out in abundance. It was a ritual repeated countless times, yet one that always carried an undercurrent of vigilance, demanding skill, patience, and a certain stoicism in the face of the solitary darkness. The tools of the trade were simple yet specialized. Paramount was a reliable light source, most often a pressurized gas lamp. In the profound blackness of the Vietnamese countryside, far from any urban glow, this lamp was more than just illumination. It was a lifeline, casting a focused beam that pierced the night, revealing the path ahead and, crucially, the prey. Hunters learned to interpret the subtle sounds and smells of the night, but their eyes depended entirely on that moving circle of light. Alongside the lamp, A hunter like Uncle Nam would carry a spear, sometimes described simply as a key, likely a multi-pronged gig or sharp implement designed for swiftly dispatching or securing the frogs. The catch was collected in sturdy bags, referred to perhaps colloquially or due to a transcription nuance as poison bags, likely durable woven sacks slung over the shoulder. Prudence dictated carrying an extra bag, just in case fortune smiled and the hunt yielded an exceptionally large bounty. A successful night could mean bringing back 3 or 4 kilograms of frogs, a significant contribution to the family larder or purse. The technique relied on the frog's natural reaction to sudden light. Caught in the steady beam of the gas lamp, they would often freeze, momentarily stunned or mesmerized. This brief window allowed the skilled hunter to approach swiftly and make the catch with their spear or gig. It required quick reflexes, a steady hand, and intimate knowledge of the terrain, knowing where the frogs were likely to congregate along the banks of paddies and canals, understanding how to move quietly through mud and water without causing alarm. Ideal conditions were typically after a heavy rain, when the fields were saturated and frogs emerged onto banks and dikes in large numbers, making them easier to spot and access. On one such evening, following a significant downpour that had lasted well into the darkening hours, Uncle Nam prepared for his solitary expedition. The rain had lessened, leaving the air thick with the scent of wet earth and decaying vegetation. Stepping out into his yard, he would have scanned the still dripping sky, a practiced eye assessing the potential bounty the night held. A sense of quiet satisfaction might have settled over him. This kind of rain was perfect. Well, with this kind of rain, he might have murmured to himself, a common thought among hunters, they'll flash to the shore, there will be a lot up here, it seems they're big. Inside his modest dwelling, he gathered his gear with the efficiency of long habit, checking the fuel in his gas lamp, ensuring the mantle glowed brightly, examining the points of his spear, selecting his collecting bags. Every piece of equipment was vital. A malfunctioning lamp or a misplaced tool could mean a wasted, or even dangerous, night. With everything prepared, Uncle Nam would step out, perhaps exchanging a few brief words with his family before pulling the simple door closed behind him, leaving the small warmth of his home for the vast, enveloping darkness outside. Holding the lamp in one hand and his spear and bags in the other, he began his journey. The initial path might have been familiar, a narrow track winding between houses or along the raised earthen dike separating the rice paddies. The only sounds would be the squelch of his own feet in the mud, the distant chorus of insects, the occasional rustle in the undergrowth, and perhaps the haunting call of a bittern echoing across the waterlogged fields. The lamplight cut a sharp, moving tunnel through the blackness, the world beyond its beam an impenetrable wall of shadow. Headed towards the wider, potentially more fruitful hunting grounds, perhaps the expansive fields belonging to a neighbor known as Hung Jiao, the sense of isolation would deepen. Here, houses were even sparser, the fields stretched out wider, and the network of canals became more intricate. The solitude was immense. While sometimes villagers hunted in small groups of 3 or 4 for companionship and added safety, it was often said that ghosts were less likely to trouble a group. Tonight, like many nights, Uncle Nam went alone. It was a testament to the necessities of life, this willingness to brave the darkness and the solitude for the sake of provision. Yet, interwoven with the routine and the economic drive was an undeniable thread of potential danger. Navigating the uneven, slippery banks in near-total darkness required constant attention. There were natural hazards, unseen holes, venomous snakes lurking in the vegetation, the simple risk of a fall into a deep canal. And then there were the other risks, the ones whispered about in the village, the unsettling sounds, the strange light sometimes seen across the marshes, the feeling of being watched. For the people of Long Keen, the night was not merely empty, it was populated, both by the creatures they hunted and by other forces, less tangible but deeply felt. As Uncle Nam moved further from the village, his single lamp a small, brave point of light against the immense canvas of the night, the familiar routine of the hunt was about to collide with something utterly unfamiliar and deeply disturbing. The familiar solitude of the hunt was about to be irrevocably broken. As Uncle Nam ventured deeper into the rain-soaked fields, his single lamp carving a path through the oppressive darkness, the familiar solitude of the hunt was initially accompanied by success. Reaching the wider expanse of Hung Jiao's fields, an area known for its abundance of amphibians after a good rain, he found his efforts rewarded. Pairs of frogs, mesmerized by the approaching light, lay still on the muddy banks, easy targets for his practiced hand. His collecting bag began to grow heavy, the weight a satisfying confirmation of a potentially profitable night's work. He moved with the quiet confidence of experience, his senses attuned to the subtle shifts in the nocturnal landscape, the chirping symphony of insects, the occasional splash in a distant canal, the heavy scent of wet earth and vegetation. The routine was deeply ingrained, a necessary dance between human need and the rhythms of the natural world. It was during a brief pause, perhaps as he secured another catch or adjusted the heavy bag on his shoulder, that the beam of his gas lamp swept across something entirely unexpected, something that shattered the night's routine. There, perched incongruously on a low mound of earth or perhaps a pile of rough-hewn blocks marking the edge of a paddy field, sat a small figure. It was a child, a boy, seemingly no older than 12, roughly the size of Uncle Nam's own son. The sight was jarring. What was a child doing out here, alone, in the dead of night, miles from the nearest cluster of houses? He held the lamp steady, trying to make sense of the scene. The boy was partially covered, perhaps huddled beneath large leaves pulled around him for shelter against the damp chill left by the earlier downpour. His head was bowed, as if asleep or simply unaware of the approaching light. Uncle Nam felt a prickle of confusion, quickly followed by a wave of concern. Whose child could this be? Had he wandered off and become lost? Or perhaps he was waiting for a parent also out hunting. He approached cautiously, the circle of light tightening around the small, still form. "Hey," Uncle Nam called out softly, his voice absorbed by the damp air. No response. He cleared his throat, a sound loud in the surrounding quiet. "Lad? Whose child are you? Why are you sitting out here alone at this hour?" The boy stirred slightly at the sound, perhaps shifting his position, but remained silent. He didn't look up. Uncle Nam moved a little closer, peering intently. Was it someone from the village he didn't immediately recognize in the uncertain light? He tried again, his tone a mixture of curiosity and authority. "Are you lost? Are you waiting for someone?" Still, the boy offered no reply, no explanation. Then, according to the account, the child slowly raised an arm, not towards Uncle Nam, but pointing vaguely into the darkness further out in the field. Uncle Nam followed the direction of the gesture with his gaze, squinting into the night beyond his lamp's reach. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw a flicker of distant yellow light, but it vanished almost as soon as he perceived it, leaving only the impenetrable blackness. He shook his head, bewildered. Had the boy been following someone carrying another lamp? "Who are you with, son?" Uncle Nam pressed, his patience wearing thin, the inherent strangeness of the situation starting to weigh on him. "Your father. Why don't you go with them instead of sitting here by yourself?" Finally, the boy seemed to respond, though not in any way that eased Uncle Nam's confusion. A low, mumbled sound emerged, thick and indistinct, like the tone of someone lost in sleep or deep sadness. Something about being sleepy, about waiting there being heavy or difficult. It made little sense. Uncle Nam chuckled uneasily, trying to lighten the odd tension. "You look fierce enough," he remarked, "sitting out here alone. Aren't you afraid of ghosts?" He expected a denial, perhaps even a spark of defiance, but the boy merely nodded slightly, a gesture seemingly indicating he felt no fear. The silence that followed felt heavy, unnatural. Despite the peculiarity of the encounter, practicalities pressed. Uncle Nam had more hunting to do in this promising area, but his frog bag was becoming cumbersome. An idea formed. The boy seemed harmless, if exceptionally quiet. "Look here, little fellow," Uncle Nam proposed, crouching down slightly beside the silent figure. "You sit here and watch this bag for me, all right? I'll just go catch a few more over there. Later, you can help me carry it if it gets too heavy. It's hard work going alone, okay, kid?" Again, the boy offered no verbal response, but simply nodded his head in acquiescence. For Uncle Nam, this silent agreement was enough. Though a current of unease still flowed beneath his thoughts, the boy's utter silence was decidedly odd. The prospect of being freed from the heavy bag was too convenient to pass up. Perhaps the child was simply shy or tired. It didn't truly matter, as long as he stayed put. "Good lad," Uncle Nam said, relieved. "Thank you now, be careful. Don't let my catch jump out. Your house nearby?" The boy just nodded again, head still bowed, offering nothing more. Secretly happy to be unburdened, Uncle Nam turned back towards the productive edge of the field, telling himself that having another person nearby, even a silent child, somehow made the solitary night feel a fraction less daunting. He could now move more freely, focus entirely on spotting the telltale glint of frogs' eyes in his lamplight. He continued his hunt, wading through the shallow water, the beam of his lamp methodically sweeping the banks. The frogs were indeed plentiful, and his concentration was absolute. After some time, however, perhaps half an hour or more, a different kind of disturbance broke the night's rhythm. It wasn't the familiar plop of a frog, but a more significant commotion in the waterlogged field just ahead of him. He swung the lamp around, casting its beam towards the source. What he saw sent a jolt of genuine surprise, bordering on alarm, through him. Parting the dark water, moving with an unnerving boldness, was a group of rats. But these were unlike any field rats Uncle Nam had ever encountered. There were 8 or 9 of them, and they were monstrously large, described as being as big as an adult human's calf. Their fur glistened wetly in the lamplight, and their small eyes, reflecting the beam, glowed with a fierce, unnatural red. They weren't scurrying away in fear as normal rats would. Instead, they seemed to hold their ground, staring directly at him, their collective presence radiating a disturbing confidence. Uncle Nam, though familiar with trapping and killing pests, felt a wave of revulsion mixed with disbelief. Their sheer size was shocking, their numbers unsettling, but it was their brazen lack of fear that felt most profoundly wrong. He instinctively tightened his grip on his spear, his hunter's instinct targeting the largest one directly in front of him. Yet, before he could even fully commit to the action, the rats moved with an uncanny coordination. As if responding to a single, silent command, or perhaps even mocking his intent, they all simultaneously dodged his unspoken threat and dove beneath the surface of the murky water, vanishing without a trace, leaving only ripples spreading outwards in the lamplight. Uncle Nam stood frozen for a moment, his heart pounding. The encounter had been brief but deeply unsettling. The size, the eyes, the collective intelligence, it defied natural explanation. Before he could fully process the strangeness of the giant rats, another sound reached his ears, this time closer, from the embankment just a few meters away. It was the distinct, soft meow of a cat. A cat? Out here? He thought, perplexed. The rain and wind had soaked everything. It was hardly a place for a domestic animal. As he turned his lamp towards the sound, 2 figures emerged from the shadows, straying towards him. 2 cats, one stark white, the other jet black. They moved with a slinking grace, but there was something immediately off about them. Uncle Nam instinctively moved to chase them away, perhaps raising his spear slightly as a deterrent. But the cats showed no fear. Instead, they approached him with unnerving purpose, weaving around his legs, rubbing against his calves. Their tails, the account state, stood rigidly erect, stiff as feeding grass. He felt the brush of their fur against his skin, and with it, a bizarre sensation, a cold, electric shock that made him want to shiver despite the humid night air. What was even stranger, truly impossible, was their condition. While Uncle Nam himself was damp from the humid air and waiting, and the ground beneath was saturated, the fur of these 2 cats appeared perfectly, unnaturally dry. It was as if the rain and dampness of the night simply didn't adhere to them. Their behavior escalated from strange familiarity to outright aggression. They seemed to calculate his movements, pressing against him, perhaps letting out low growls or hisses. Uncle Nam, now genuinely alarmed, tried forcefully to kick them away or push them off with his spear. They were strangely persistent, their touch sending more of those unpleasant jolts through him. He cried out, perhaps in frustration as much as fear, swinging more determinedly. Then, as abruptly as they had appeared, they acted in unison once more. Both cats simultaneously bent low, then launched themselves away, not running along the bank, but throwing themselves into the watery expanse of the field. They hit the water not with a splash, but seemingly vanished beneath the surface. Just a moment later, from the middle of the now undisturbed field, arose an eerie sound, the amplified cry of a cat, yet distorted, loud, and chillingly similar to the desolate night cry of a human child. It was a sound that echoed across the dark water, seeming far too loud, too resonant, too filled with unnatural sorrow to belong to any mere animal. The chilling cries of the vanished cats echoing in his ears, Uncle Nam knew with cold certainty that this was no ordinary night. The strange boy, the giant rats, the spectral cats, these were not tricks of the light or his imagination. Something was profoundly wrong, deeply unnatural, unfolding around him in the isolated fields of Long Kieng. The routine hunt had transformed into a series of increasingly terrifying encounters, and the feeling that he was no longer alone, that unseen forces were at play, settled upon him like the damp night air. The initial unease had now curdled into genuine fear, prompting a desperate urge to retreat, to get back to the relative safety of the known path, though a deeper dread whispered that escape might not be so simple. These unsettling encounters, it seemed, were merely a prelude. The chilling cries of the vanished cats, echoing unnaturally loud across the waterlogged fields, left Uncle Nam paralyzed for a moment, the blood running cold in his veins. Any attempt at rationalization abandoned him, raw, primal fear took hold. His only instinct now was flight, a desperate scramble away from this place where the natural order had completely fractured. Turning his back on the deeper fields, he began to stumble towards what he hoped was the path back, his gas lamp swinging wildly, casting frantic, dancing shadows. But escape was not to be simple. Almost immediately, he became aware of sounds behind him, not merely the squelch of his own feet in the mud, but something else. A persistent noise, perhaps muffled footsteps, perhaps just an indefinable sense of presence, dogged his heels. Was it the spectral cats returning, or something new? He didn't dare look back. Panic fueled his clumsy retreat. He tripped over unseen roots, splashed through muddy pools, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Then, adding to the disorientation, strange lights began to appear in the periphery of his vision. Drifting close to the edge of the canal, near the low-hanging branches of waterside flora, were 3 or 4 luminous orbs, described as being the size of goose eggs. Some glowed an eerie green, others a sickly yellow. They didn't stay still but fluttered irregularly, rising and falling like malevolent will-o'-the-wisps, seeming to flank his path, guiding him or perhaps hurting him further into terror. He frantically tried to turn away from them, aiming himself towards the main track, the rough path that served as a road. As he ran with all the strength fear lent him, the sounds returned, multiplied. It was a cacophony now, a chorus of mocking laughter that sounded chillingly like the cries of several cats mixed with the high-pitched squishing or squeaking of countless mice, all seeming to converge behind him, a spectral pack driving him onward. Blinded by terror and the erratic beam of his lamp, Uncle Nam's foot caught on something, perhaps a hidden vine or uneven ground, sending him sprawling forward. He didn't land on hard earth or mud. Instead, his fall was broken by something disturbingly soft, yielding, like a pile of discarded rags or loose soil. He scrambled to push himself up, swinging the lamp around to see what he had fallen upon. The sight that met his eyes almost stopped his heart. Lying directly beneath him, illuminated in the stark glare, was what appeared to be a newborn baby, terrifyingly fresh, its skin still red and raw. Before he could recoil, as he struggled to regain his footing, the phantom infant writhed. Its tiny mouth stretched open, impossibly wide, forming a dark O in its face, and from it issued a piercing, high-pitched cry, a sound described as the Song of the North movement, perhaps a local term for a wail that chills the soul. The horror compounded instantly. As Uncle Nam frantically pushed himself away, his lamp beam swept wider, revealing that he was not alone with the spectral infant. The ground around him seemed to writhe with similar forms. There were countless small, indistinct shapes, some like glowing red stones, perhaps disembodied eyes. Others described vaguely as large and small capital, suggesting figures of varying sizes. Some lay prone like the first baby, others were sitting up, their forms indistinct in the wavering light. One particularly horrifying figure, perhaps slightly larger than the others, slowly stretched out long, unnaturally slender arms towards him, its movements jerky yet purposeful. From these assembled phantoms arose a collective sound, a low, resonant hum or moan described as a hungry voice asking for warmth, a chilling chorus that resonated deep in Uncle Nam's bones, raising goosebumps despite the humid night. Sweat poured down his forehead, soaking his simple shirt. He was no longer just encountering isolated oddities, he was surrounded, trapped in a mass manifestation of the spectral. Until this moment, perhaps some sliver of doubt remained, some hope of misinterpretation. But now, Uncle Nam knew with terrifying certainty. These were the ghosts of the Ratch, the spirits of the canals and waterways, perhaps the restless souls of drowned infants or other unfortunates, and they had risen together, drawn to him, trapping him in their midst. His mind, overwhelmed by terror, fixated on a single, perhaps irrational, point of hope, the silent boy he had left guarding his frog bag. Maybe returning to that spot, to the only other, seemingly, human presence he had encountered, offered some slim chance of refuge or orientation. Or perhaps it was simply the only landmark his fear-addled brain could grasp. Ignoring the reaching arms and chilling cries around him, Uncle Nam scrambled to his feet and began a stumbling, desperate flight back towards the field's edge where he'd left the boy. He ran blindly, falling and rising, crashing through low vegetation, his clothes becoming caked in mud, the phantom sounds, crying, laughing, whispering, swirling around him, pressing in from all sides. It felt like an eternity, this frantic journey through the haunted darkness, his head and neck slick with mud and cold sweat. Finally, panting, sobbing, he saw the familiar shape in the beam of his lamp, the small boy, still sitting on the earthen mound, head bowed, exactly as he had left him, seemingly asleep or oblivious to the surrounding chaos. A choked gasp of relief escaped Uncle Nam. He staggered closer, leaning on his spear, trying to catch his breath. "Boy! Boy!" He might have rasped, his voice hoarse with fear and exertion. For a fragile moment, the sight offered a sliver of normalcy in the terrifying unreality of the night. Perhaps the worst was over. Perhaps this strange child had been untouched by the horrors that had pursued him. He took another step closer, his eyes falling on the ground beside the boy where his frog bag should have been. It was gone. Or rather, the bag was there, but it was flat, empty. The kilos of frogs he had so painstakingly collected had vanished. The frogs. He stammered, pointing. Where did they go? He looked at the boy, expecting, needing some kind of answer, any kind of answer. The boy slowly, deliberately, looked up. And Uncle Nam's fragile hope shattered into a million icy shards. The face illuminated by the gas lamp was not that of a normal child. Its skin was deathly pale, described as white sick, stretched taut over unseen bones. The limbs seemed wrong, distorted or unnaturally thin. But it was the eyes and mouth that conveyed the true horror. The boy's eyes were entirely black, devoid of any white, like vacant pools of obsidian reflecting the lamplight with a dead sheen. And the mouth, it stretched open into a grotesque, impossibly wide grin, smeared thick and dark with blood. Lodged deep within that horrifying maw, Uncle Nam could clearly see the partially swallowed head of one of his frogs, its body dangling limply within the throat. The small, webbed hind legs were still twitching faintly, a final, macabre detail in the monstrous visage. A strangled scream tore from Uncle Nam's throat. This was no lost child, no mere phantom, this was a predator, a ghoul that had consumed his catch. He no longer possessed any coherent thought, only the overwhelming, animalistic urge to flee. He dropped his lamp, dropped his spear, the tools of his trade utterly forgotten. He turned and ran for his life, back towards the main path, towards the distant, theoretical safety of the village, towards the area near Uncle Vom's land. He crashed through thorny bushes, oblivious to the pain, propelled solely by adrenaline and abject terror. Behind him, the monstrous child's laughter erupted, a high-pitched, gleeful sound that pursued him through the darkness. The eerie green and red lights reappeared, flanking him again, flashing on and off like spectral escorts, driving him faster, deeper into panic. He stumbled and fell repeatedly, his body coated in mud, his mind lost in a fog of terror. How long he ran, he couldn't say. But eventually, lungs burning, muscles screaming, he burst out of the fields and onto a more established dirt track or road. He collapsed, gasping for air, the sounds of pursuit perhaps fading slightly behind him, or maybe just lost in the roaring of blood in his ears. He lay there for some time, trembling uncontrollably, trying to push himself up. It was then, as the first hint of pre-dawn gray perhaps began to lighten the eastern sky, the time known as Min Sang, that he saw it, another light approaching along the road. A lantern, carried by a figure walking towards him. Hope surged anew, desperate and fierce. Someone else. A fellow villager. Safety. Uncle Nam pushed himself into a sitting position, brushing frantically at the mud caking his face and clothes, ready to call out, to beg for help. As the figure drew closer, he saw it was a man dressed in incongruously clean, pure white clothes, strange attire for traversing muddy country roads before dawn. But Uncle Nam was too relieved to dwell on the peculiarity. The man stopped near him, raising his lamp. "Brother 5. The man called out, his voice clear, using a familiar name for Uncle Nam. "What happened to you? Why are you screaming so fiercely out here?" The use of his name confirmed the man knew him. Relief washed over Uncle Nam, so potent it almost made him weep. "A ghost," he stammered, his voice trembling, pointing back towards the fields he had just escaped. "I saw a ghost. A child, over there, in Hung Jiao's field, eating a live frog, mouth full of blood, terrifying." He was babbling, incoherent with residual fear, struggling to convey the horror. The man in white listened patiently, then stepped closer, his lamp held high. "A child ghost, you say?" he asked, his tone calm, perhaps even slightly curious. "Tell me, what did its face look like?" Uncle Nam, desperate to be understood, to share the burden of the terror, looked up into the man's face to describe the ghastly visage he had witnessed. And in that moment, under the revealing light of the man's own lamp, Uncle Nam saw it. The man's face was not the face of a concerned neighbor. It was the exact same face as the monstrous, blood-mouthed child ghost he had fled. Pale skin, empty black eyes, the horrifyingly wide mouth. The rescuer was the monster in disguise. The realization struck Uncle Nam with the force of a physical blow. There was no escape. The horror had followed him, toyed with him, and now stood before him in mocking normality. He couldn't run anymore. He couldn't even think. A single word tore from his lips, a final, despairing scream, "Ghost." And then, the world dissolved into blackness as he collapsed unconscious upon the muddy road. It wasn't until the sun was well up, casting long shadows across the fields, that Uncle Nam was found. A group of fellow villagers, including the notably strong and perhaps braver figures of Ba Du and Sao Dung, were heading out to their fields, laughing and talking, when they saw the inert, mud-covered form lying by the roadside. Their cheerful banter died instantly. Approaching cautiously, they recognized the familiar figure of Uncle Nam. Sao Dung, perhaps the most practical, knelt and checked for breath. Relief washed over them when they found he was still alive, though deeply unconscious. Working together, they carefully lifted their neighbor and began the arduous task of carrying him back to his home. His wife, Sister Nam, was likely preparing the morning meal, perhaps a pot of simple rice porridge, when the group arrived bearing her husband's inert form. Her initial calls of greeting turned to cries of alarm as she saw his state. With the help of the rescuers, Uncle Nam was laid gently on his bed. While his wife frantically searched for medicinal oils and balms, Ba Du, and Sao Dung recounted finding him on the road. Later, after much effort, perhaps vigorous rubbing with coinage scraping or strong liniments, Uncle Nam slowly regained consciousness. Disoriented, seeing the familiar surroundings of his home and the concerned faces of his wife and neighbors, the terror of the night came flooding back. Once he had gathered himself, perhaps fortified with a bowl of hot porridge to ward off the deep chill that still clung to him, he recounted his horrifying ordeal: the silent boy, the giant rats, the spectral cats, the phantom baby, the chilling transformation, and the final, terrifying encounter with the ghost in white. His tale, delivered with the conviction of fresh terror, would undoubtedly become another chilling whisper added to the spectral heritage of Long Kieng, a stark reminder of the shadows that dwelled just beyond the lamplight in the Vietnamese countryside. While Uncle Nam recovered from his ordeal, his chilling tale undoubtedly adding another layer to the village's fearful respect for the night, the spectral inhabitants of Long Kieng remained. His harrowing experience was not unique in this landscape where the veil between worlds seemed thin, particularly after dark. Other villagers, driven by necessity or circumstance onto the lonely paths crisscrossing the fields and canals, faced their own unique journeys into that same unsettling darkness. One such account involves a man known as Seven Tam, whose routine trip to market descended into a protracted encounter with the phantoms of the road. Like many others in Long Kieng, Seven Tam relied on supplementing his income through whatever means the land and water offered. On this particular occasion, he had likely spent the earlier part of the night catching shrimp, a valuable commodity to be sold fresh at the Chiu Hamlet market. Timing was crucial. Arriving early ensured the best prices and the highest chance of selling his entire catch before the day grew hot and other sellers flooded the stalls. His misfortune began with a simple miscalculation, ironically caused by the brilliance of the night sky. It was the 16th day of the lunar cycle, and the moon hung high and full, bathing the landscape in an unusually bright, silvery light. Waking in what he assumed were the pre-dawn hours, deceived by the moon's intensity into thinking morning was near, Seven Tam hastily gathered his load, likely 2 baskets heavy with shrimp, balanced on a sturdy bamboo pole across his shoulders, and set out alone. In reality, it was much earlier, closer to midnight than dawn, placing him on the deserted country road in the deepest, most silent hours of the night. The journey from Long Kieng to Chiu Hamlet was considerable, more than 8 kilometers on foot, made more arduous by the heavy, swinging load. Initially, the bright moonlight might have seemed a blessing, illuminating the dirt track ahead more clearly than usual. He walked steadily, the rhythmic creak of his carrying pole and the soft padding of his bare feet on the packed earth the only sounds accompanying him. The air was still and cool, the vast, empty field stretching away on either side under the serene moonlight. It was a profound solitude, the sleeping village far behind, the destination still hours away. It wasn't long, however, before the first tendrils of unease began to creep in. A nagging feeling started. Was his load getting heavier? It seemed illogical, yet the baskets on his pole felt increasingly burdensome, pressing down on his shoulders with an unusual weight, almost as if something unseen was subtly pulling back against his progress. He tried to dismiss the sensation. Fatigue, surely. He hadn't slept well, perhaps, troubled by the recent rains or anxieties about the market. The long walk ahead naturally made any load feel heavier over time. Yet, the feeling persisted, a subtle drag that interfered with his rhythm. "It's already getting late," he might have muttered to himself, still partially convinced by his earlier misjudgment of the time, seeking an excuse to pause. "Let's rest a bit, get my strength back. Going like this, I'll be exhausted by the time I arrive." He found a suitable spot by the roadside, carefully lowered the heavy shrimp baskets from his shoulder, and sat down, perhaps leaning against his bamboo pole, intending to catch his breath for just a few minutes. As the basket settled onto the ground, his peripheral vision caught a fleeting movement behind him, a flicker of white, like a shadow detaching itself from the deeper darkness and vanishing instantly. He turned his head sharply, but there was nothing there. Again, he rationalized, exhaustion playing tricks on his eyes, the moonlight casting strange shadows. What was truly strange, though, a thought that surfaced with more clarity now that he was still, was the utter emptiness of the road. Even at this hour, shouldn't there be someone else? Other early rising traders heading to market? Farmers tending to early tasks? Yet, looking back and forth along the moonlit track, he saw no one. The fields on either side were equally deserted, silent save for the nocturnal chorus of insects. A sudden, chilling doubt entered his mind. Heaven and earth, he might have exclaimed under his breath, glancing up at the high, bright moon, is it still late at night? Hasn't it even dawned yet? He realized his mistake then. The brilliant light wasn't the approaching dawn, it was the peak of the full moon, the 16th night. It was likely barely past midnight. A wave of frustration washed over him. He had rushed out far too early, deceived by the light. He briefly considered turning back, but a quick calculation told him he had already covered a significant distance, perhaps almost halfway. Returning now would be just as tiring as pressing on. Might as well keep going, he resolved, perhaps sighing. Maybe it's better to get to the ferry landing early. If there's no boat yet, I can find a spot to rest properly. Resigned, he stood, shouldered the heavy baskets once more, and resumed his walk, this time at a more measured, normal pace, the illusion of urgency dispelled, replaced by the reality of a long, solitary walk through the deepest part of the night. He walked on, the straight dirt road ahead clearly illuminated by the unwavering moonlight. After some time, the familiar structure of the Rachjia Bridge appeared in the distance, marking roughly the halfway point of his journey. He felt a small measure of relief. Reaching the bridge felt like progress. But just as that feeling settled, a new sound intruded upon the night's stillness, emanating from behind him. It was a soft but distinct rustling, accompanied by a low, intermittent groan, like someone moving with great difficulty or pain. Annoyed and instantly wary, Seven Tam stopped and quickly turned his head. About 8 or 9 meters back down the road, clearly visible in the moonlight, was a dark shape huddled low to the ground. It looked like a pile of black rags, or perhaps someone sitting hunched over. As he watched, it moved, emitting another low groan. It wasn't stationary, it was following him. More unnervingly, its movement seemed directly linked to his own. When he stood still, it remained relatively motionless, just a dark lump on the road. When he took a tentative step forward, it shifted, rustling, groaning, and crawling slowly after him. If he sped up, its rustling became faster, the groans perhaps more insistent, maintaining its distance but undeniably pursuing him. Seven Tam felt a surge of irritation mixed with a growing dread. He recognized the description. This matched tales told in the village about a haunting specific to this stretch of road. Local lore spoke of an old beggar with crippled legs who used to frequent this path, eventually being struck and killed by a Western military vehicle that sped away, leaving his mangled body on the roadside. Buried nearby by pitying villagers, his resentful spirit was said to manifest as this crawling, groaning entity, often begging or simply following lone travelers at night, particularly those who showed fear or weakness. Knowing the story didn't make the reality any less unnerving. He tried different tactics. He slowed his pace deliberately, gripping his sturdy bamboo carrying pole, intending to let the entity draw closer so he could confront it, perhaps strike it. But as he slowed, the crawling shape also slowed, maintaining its distance. He sped up again, hoping to outrun it, but it matched his pace, the hateful rustling and groaning sounds a constant, unnerving presence behind him. He couldn't shake it. It wasn't overtly threatening, not yet, but its persistence, its unnatural movement, its association with the grim local legend, it frayed his nerves. He decided the only option was to walk as fast as he could, hoping either to leave its perceived territory or simply reach his destination sooner. He had only taken a few more quick steps, the rhythmic groaning and rustling still dogging him, when a new, sharp sound split the night, the loud, aggressive barking of a dog, coming from somewhere further back down the road. Seven Tam instinctively turned again. Racing towards them out of the darkness was a large, powerfully built black dog. It ran directly at the crawling dark shape on the road. The effect was instantaneous. The crawling entity seemed to recoil, perhaps emitting a final, choked sound, and then, incredibly, it vanished. One moment it was there, a tangible source of dread, the next, only the empty, moonlit road remained. The black dog, having apparently routed the crawling ghost, trotted forward, stopped briefly near Seven Tam, then continued past him, taking the lead on the path ahead. Relief washed over Seven Tam, immense and immediate. He had heard stories that ghosts, particularly lower-level spirits or manifestations like the crawling beggar, were afraid of dogs, especially large, fierce ones. This dog had appeared like a savior, dispatching the entity that had been tormenting him. He felt a surge of gratitude towards the animal. It now walked steadily ahead, about 10 paces in front, seemingly guiding him, its presence a comforting buffer against the night's lingering unease. Feeling much more confident, no longer burdened by the immediate fear of the crawling phantom, Seven Tam readily followed, adjusting his pace to match the dog's, his heavy load feeling slightly lighter now. They continued like this for some time, the dog leading, Seven Tam following, silence returning save for their footsteps. Ahead, the structure of the Rachjia bridge loomed larger, its wooden planks and railings starkly defined in the moonlight against the dark water of the canal it spanned. As they reached the head of the bridge, the black dog stopped, turning slightly as if waiting for him. Seven Tam approached, ready to cross, perhaps intending to offer a silent thanks to his canine protector. But as he drew within a few paces, something impossible began to happen. The dog began to change. It wasn't a subtle shift, it was a grotesque, terrifying expansion. Its form seemed to swell, its outline blurring and stretching upwards and outwards. Within seconds, the familiar shape of the large black dog was gone, replaced by a monstrous form that continued to grow, reaching the height of a man, then taller still, until it loomed over him, described in the accounts as being impossibly, terrifyingly, bigger than a buffalo. This colossal black shape stood directly at the entrance to the bridge, completely blocking his path, its sheer size defying all logic and reason. Seven Tam froze, rooted to the spot, disbelief warring with sheer terror. He was still grappling with the impossible transformation when the monstrous creature before him opened its unseen mouth and emitted a deafening roar, a sound not like a dog's bark, but a deep, powerful bellow akin to that of an enraged buffalo, echoing across the silent landscape. Then, with a final, shocking movement, the giant entity launched itself sideways from the bridge railing. It didn't jump onto the bank or along the bridge, it plunged directly down towards the dark, reflecting water of the canal below. Seven Tam braced himself for the colossal splash that must surely follow, the sound of such a massive form hitting the water. But it never came. Instead of a mighty impact, there was only the faintest, most insignificant sound, a tiny plink, like a single small pebble dropped into the water. And then, silence. The creature was gone. The water beneath the bridge remained dark and still, offering no clue to the impossible event that had just transpired. Standing alone at the head of the Rachjia bridge, the silence after the phantom dog's disappearance pressed heavily on Seven Tam. The realization crashed down upon him with sickening force. The dog had not been a protector, it had been another phantom, a shapeshifter, perhaps even more dangerous and deceptive than the crawling ghost it had seemingly dispatched. The relief he had felt was a cruel illusion. He had traded one haunting for another, and now stood vulnerable once more in the deep, moonlit night. He had crossed paths with shape-shifting terror, but his journey through the haunted landscape of Long Kieng was not yet complete. Ahead lay the Rachjia bridge itself, spanning the dark, silent water, and beyond it, the lonely road leading towards Tan Quy School, a place burdened with its own dark history and spectral resident. The unsettling disappearance of the phantom dog into the dark waters of the canal left Seven Tam shaken but resolute. The night had already proven treacherous, filled with deceptive phantoms and chilling encounters, but his journey was far from over. He had to press on. Ahead, the moonlit dirt track led directly past the old, likely deserted Tan Quy School, a location whispered about in hushed tones throughout the villages of Long Kieng. It wasn't just the building's age or isolation that inspired fear, the school and its surroundings were inextricably linked with a dark and tragic local history, haunted, it was said, by a sorrowful yet potentially malevolent white shadow, the ghost of a young woman named Miss Ut Lien. Knowing he had to pass this specific place, burdened by its grim reputation, added a new, focused layer of dread to Seven Tam's already terrified state. The stories about the White Shadow were common knowledge, a cautionary tale woven into the fabric of local folklore. The origins of the legend stretched back decades, to a turbulent period likely around the 1930s to 1950s, a time when certain areas bordering the established villages remained wild and lawless. On the far side of the river, in a relatively inaccessible area, a notorious gang of criminals had established a stronghold. They were a motley collection of outcasts, hardened thugs, robbers, and fugitives avoiding the reach of colonial or local authorities. Occupying a swath of riverside land, they lived outside the bounds of society, emerging periodically to terrorize the surrounding villages. Their methods were brutal and effective. They extorted money, livestock, and goods, often sending intimidating letters beforehand, demanding tribute by a certain date. Reporting them to the authorities proved futile. The gang operated with impunity, perhaps through bribery or sheer remoteness. Any family unfortunate enough to receive such a demand faced a terrible choice: comply or face violent retribution. Those who refused, or pleaded for mercy, often saw their homes burned to the ground, their livelihoods destroyed. Fear of the gang cast a long shadow over the lives of the honest villagers. Amidst this climate of fear lived a respected local figure known as Teacher Bin. He and his family resided near the area that would later house the Tan Quy School. Teacher Bin was known for his learning and integrity, but it was his youngest daughter, universally called Miss Ut Lien, who captured the hearts and admiration of the community. She was renowned not only for her exceptional beauty, described as having a face like a painting and skin as smooth and white as grapefruit blossoms, but also for her gentle nature, education, and diligent character. Many young men secretly admired her, but the combination of her virtue and the general poverty and danger of the times perhaps kept suitors at bay. Tragically, whispers of Miss Lien's remarkable beauty eventually reached the ears of the brutal leader of the Riverside robber gang, a man referred to in some accounts, perhaps derisively, as News 10 Small. Consumed by avarice and lust, he decided he must possess her. Following the gang's established pattern of terror, a letter was dispatched to Teacher Bin's home. It wasn't a request, but a demand. Early the next morning, the gang would send men to collect Miss Lien, who was to become the leader's fifth concubine. Faced with this horrifying ultimatum, Teacher Bin and his wife knew that resistance was suicidal and compliance unthinkable. Their only hope was to get their daughter away before the gang arrived. A desperate plan was hatched. Lien would flee under the cover of darkness to Saigon, where relatives might offer sanctuary. That night, Miss Lien hastily packed a few belongings, her heart filled with terror and sorrow. In the deepest hour of the night, likely close to 4 a.m., her parents tearfully embraced her, wrapped her head in a concealing towel, and opened the back door for her to slip away into the darkness. But their desperate hope was shattered almost immediately. Lien had taken barely 10 steps from the house when dark figures emerged from the shadows of a nearby banana grove. The gang had anticipated their move, or perhaps had informants. Tall thugs blocked her path. "Where do you think you're going at this hour, girl?" One sneered, grabbing her. "Trying to run away?" Terrified and trapped, Miss Lien could offer no resistance. She was quickly overpowered, while other members of the gang stormed the house, dragging out her parents. Teacher Bin and his wife were brutally beaten for their perceived conspiracy, for daring to deny the gang leader his prize. The thugs showed no mercy, striking the elderly couple repeatedly until they lay bruised and broken in a pool of their own blood. Some accounts suggest they were then tied up, helpless, as the robbers callously set fire to their home, the flames consuming the structure while the perpetrators laughed maniacally. Whether the parents perished in the fire or were left to die from their injuries amidst the ruins, the outcome was devastating. Having dealt with the parents, the thugs turned their full attention to Miss Lien, dragging her away from the scene of destruction. They likely assumed that witnessing such brutality would break her spirit, leaving her terrified and compliant. They gravely misjudged her character. Despite being a gentle young woman, Miss Lien possessed an unyielding spirit. Faced with the horrific prospect of capture and violation, she fought back with unexpected ferocity. But her struggles were futile against the armed men. In a final, tragic act of ultimate defiance, determined not to fall into the robbers' hands alive, Miss Lien bit off her own tongue, choosing a painful death over dishonor. She was only 17 years old. When dawn broke, villagers discovered the horrific scene, the smoldering ruins of Teacher Bin's home, the brutalized bodies of her parents nearby, or perhaps they had vanished, their fate unknown, and, not far away, near the grounds where the Tan Quy School would eventually stand, the lifeless body of Miss Ut Lien. The community was shocked and heartbroken by the tragedy. Pitying her fate, some villagers gently prepared her body and buried her nearby. The story might have ended there, a grim footnote in the region's violent history. But Miss Lien's spirit, it seemed, could not rest. Perhaps because of the innocence lost, the extreme violence of her death, or the potent combination of injustice and tragedy, her soul lingered. Initially, the haunting was sorrowful rather than malevolent. On bright moonlit nights, locals began reporting sightings of a spectral figure, a woman dressed in white, often seen near the place of her death or sometimes drifting silently over the roof of the Tan Quy School. This white shadow would weep mournfully, her cries echoing sadly in the night air, but she didn't approach or harm anyone. While unsettling, the villagers grew somewhat accustomed to this sad apparition, viewing it as the sorrowful remnant of the tragedy. However, exactly 1 year after Miss Lien's death, the nature of the haunting took a darker turn. Villagers heading out early to the field stumbled upon a gruesome discovery near the spot where Miss Lien had died, the dead body of a man, identifiable by his distinctive clothing, perhaps the large gray-oiled leather outfit mentioned, as none other than News 10 Small, the leader of the robber gang who had coveted her. His death was violent, bearing marks suggesting a supernatural attack. The following year, on the anniversary again, another known associate of the gang was found dead in a similar fashion near the same location. The conclusion among the terrified villagers was inescapable. The gentle ghost of Miss Lien had transformed into a vengeful spirit, finally exacting retribution upon those responsible for her death and the destruction of her family. Her initial sorrow had given way to righteous fury. Everyone believed that with her primary tormentors punished, her spirit might finally find peace and depart. But that was not the case. Even after her perceived revenge was complete, the sightings continued, particularly around the Tan Quy School on moonlit nights, typically between midnight and 4 a.m., the very hours of her attempted escape and death. Her behavior, however, shifted once more. She was no longer just a weeping shadow, nor solely focused on her attackers. Now, her attention turned towards any lone man unfortunate enough to be traveling the road near the school during those haunted hours. She would appear suddenly, the floating white figure with long, dark hair unbound, her face and limbs sometimes described as having a ghastly greenish pallor, clad in the pure white of a shroud. She would approach, sometimes trying to interact, sometimes simply manifesting terrifyingly close. Encounters with the white shadow of Tan Quy School rarely ended well for the traveler. While she didn't necessarily kill these later victims, contact with her invariably resulted in severe consequences. Men would fall gravely ill upon reaching home, suffering high fevers, delirium, and weakness that could last for weeks or even months. Some were said to temporarily lose their minds, plagued by nightmares and waking visions. Only through sincere prayers, respectful avoidance, or perhaps specific rituals could her lingering anger sometimes be appeased. This was the legend of the White Shadow, the tragic tale of Miss Ut Lien, whose violent death had birthed a powerful and enduring haunting. It was this specific entity, known for its sorrow turned to vengeance turned to indiscriminate spectral harassment, that awaited travelers on the road by Tan Quy School. Armed with this chilling local history, the shadows around the old school building seemed deeper to Seven Tam, the moonlight colder, as he gathered his courage to continue his journey. The legend was no longer just a village tale recounted around evening fires. As he approached the infamous location, it felt like a palpable, watching presence, waiting for him just ahead in the oppressive silence of the deep night. Armed with the chilling local history of the White Shadow, the shadows around the old Tan Quy School seemed deeper, the moonlight colder, as Seven Tam cautiously continued his journey. The legend was no longer just an abstract village tale. As he drew nearer to the infamous location, it felt like a palpable, watching presence, waiting for him just ahead in the oppressive silence of the deep night. The weight of his shrimp basket seemed insignificant now compared to the weight of dread settling upon him. His footsteps slowed as the simple, perhaps slightly dilapidated structure of the school came into view, stark and isolated under the brilliant 16th-day moon. It was then that the silence was broken, not by any natural sound of the countryside, but by noises emanating from within the seemingly empty school building. First, a rhythmic, intermittent knocking sound, described oddly as clattering, perhaps loose shutters banging in a non-existent breeze, or maybe the sound of desks being struck inside a vacant classroom. Then, layered beneath it, a low, monotonous sound, almost like chanting, or someone diligently reading lessons aloud in the dead of night. Seven Tam strained his ears, bewildered. Who could possibly be inside the school at this hour? Was it squatters? Or something else entirely? He tried to dismiss it, telling himself it was just the wind, or his overwrought imagination playing tricks. But the sounds persisted, a steady, inexplicable activity within the dark windows, adding a deeply unsettling layer to the already ominous atmosphere. Such sounds, devoid of any logical explanation, only served to heighten his apprehension as he forced himself to walk past the school grounds. He kept his eyes fixed on the path ahead, wanting only to get past the building as quickly as possible. He was perhaps 10 meters away, level with the edge of the schoolyard, when a movement from the corner of his eye made him flinch, his heart leaping into his throat. From the dark recesses of the school building, perhaps emerging directly from the shadowed roofline, or maybe gliding from a darkened doorway, a figure appeared. It was tall, unnervingly so, perhaps 2 meters in height, and draped in cloth of the purest white, stark against the surrounding gloom. Its most striking feature was its hair, a cascade of impossibly long, black strands that flowed down from its head, obscuring any facial features and reaching almost to the hem of its white covering. It didn't walk, it seemed to float, its movement eerily smooth and silent, drifting slowly down from the building, across the deserted schoolyard, and directly towards the road, towards him. Seven Tam froze, ice flooding his veins. He didn't need to see a face to know what, or who, this was. The towering height, the shroud-like white garment, the terrifyingly long black hair, the spectral floating motion, the location, every detail screamed the legend he had just been contemplating. This was her. The white shadow of Tan Quy School. The vengeful ghost of Miss Ut Lien. The theoretical horror of folklore had just materialized before his very eyes. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead and soaked the back of his simple shirt. His limbs felt heavy as lead, his breath caught in his chest. He wanted to run, to scream, but found himself momentarily paralyzed by sheer terror. The white figure continued its slow, inexorable advance, drifting silently across the moonlit road, closing the distance between them. Its movements were deliberate, unhurried, yet filled with an undeniable sense of purpose. There was something chillingly inevitable about its approach. Seven Tam knew, with a certainty that bypassed rational thought, that this entity intended to confront him. Turning back was unthinkable. The long, dark road behind him held its own terrors, including the memory of the shape-shifting dog. Standing still felt like suicide. He desperately considered trying to edge past, hoping to slip by quickly while the ghost was still some distance away. But as if sensing his intention, the white shadow adjusted its trajectory, ensuring their paths would inevitably cross. There was no escape. He was trapped, facing the legendary specter head-on. In that moment of absolute terror, a fragment of village wisdom, a piece of common folklore about the weaknesses of spirits, flashed through his mind. Ghosts, creatures bound to darkness and shadow, were said to fear the dawn. They feared the light, and most especially, they feared the sound that heralded the coming day, the crowing of the rooster. It was a signal that their time was ending, that the protective cloak of night was lifting, potentially exposing them to forces that could harm or dissipate them. It was a desperate, flimsy straw of hope, but it was all he had. He had to try. Taking a ragged, shuddering breath, Summoning all his remaining courage, Seven Tam threw back his head and forced out a sound, his best, albeit clumsy, imitation of a rooster's crow. He tried to capture the whole sequence, the initial flapping sounds, the building crescendo, the final triumphant call, described in the account as making the sound of flapping wings. The chicken sang the old song. The sound felt thin and reedy in the vast silence, a pathetic human mimicry against the profound stillness of the haunted night. For a heart-stopping second, it seemed to work. The advancing white shadow paused in its tracks, perhaps momentarily startled or confused by the unexpected noise. A flicker of desperate hope ignited in Seven Tam's chest. But the hope died almost instantly. The ghostly figure tilted its shrouded head slightly, and from within its depths came a low, guttural sound, a gloomy sigh, a chilling whisper, or perhaps even a sound of spectral amusement or contempt. It had recognized the imitation for what it was, a fake. The pause ended. The white shadow resumed its silent, terrifying drift towards him, seemingly unfazed, perhaps even angered, by his desperate ploy. Panic threatened to overwhelm Seven Tam entirely. His trick had failed. The ghost was still coming. He wanted to turn and run, but his legs wouldn't obey. In a final, desperate act, fueled by sheer terror, he tried again. He filled his lungs, ignoring the burning fear, and let out another crow, louder this time, more frantic, pouring every ounce of his fear and desperation into the sound, mimicking the rooster's call with all his might. And then, something miraculous happened. His loud, albeit fake, crow carried clearly through the preternaturally still night air. From somewhere in the distance, perhaps a small, unseen farmstead nestled amongst the fields beyond the school, came an answering sound, the sharp, clear crow of a real rooster. Then another joined in, closer this time. And another. As if his desperate cry had broken some nocturnal spell, a chain reaction began. Soon, the air was filled with the authentic, cacophonous symphony of multiple roosters heralding a dawn that was still, in reality, hours away. The night sky, previously silent save for the eerie sounds from the school, now echoed with the undeniable, life-affirming sound of the coming day. The effect on the white shadow was immediate and dramatic. Upon hearing the chorus of genuine rooster crows, the spectral figure stopped dead in its tracks. Its ethereal form seemed to waver, flicker, as if the very sound were inimical to its existence. It emitted one final, perhaps frustrated or startled, sound, a gasp or a choked repetition of its earlier gloomy utterance. Then, without hesitation, it turned abruptly. Moving with a speed that belied its earlier slow drift, it floated rapidly back towards the dark school building. It didn't use a door or window, its form seemed to simply glide straight through the solid wall, vanishing instantly from sight. Simultaneously, the strange knocking and chanting sounds that had emanated from within the school abruptly ceased. A profound, almost deafening silence descended once more upon Tan Quy School, but this time it felt empty, devoid of the malevolent presence that had filled it moments before. Seven Tam stood trembling for several long seconds, scarcely able to believe what had happened. The ghost was gone. The roosters, nature's own exorcists, had driven it away. Relief washed over him in a dizzying, overwhelming wave, so potent it almost buckled his knees. He was alive. He was unharmed. He didn't waste another moment. Scrabbling to retrieve his carrying pole and the precious shrimp baskets he had dropped in his terror, he turned his back on the now silent school and fled. He ran as if the legions of hell were at his heels, his footsteps pounding on the dirt track, heading towards the distant promise of the fairy landing, towards the world of the living. He didn't look back, not even once, the fading sounds of the crowing roosters the most beautiful music he had ever heard. His terrifying encounter with the white shadow of Tan Quy School was over, a stark confirmation of the legends that haunted the long Kieng night, leaving him with a story that would surely be recounted, and shuddered over, for years to come. Having narrowly escaped the spectral encounter at Tan Quy School, Seven Tam fled towards the relative safety of the ferry landing, his terrifying experience becoming another chilling thread woven into the complex tapestry of Long Kieng's folklore. His journey through the moonlit darkness, marked by pursuit, deception, and confrontation with a legendary spirit, stands alongside the harrowing ordeal endured by Uncle Nam as a stark testament to the pervasive presence of the supernatural in the collective consciousness of this isolated community during the mid-20th century. These two accounts, meticulously preserved through local tradition and attributed to chroniclers like Lo Hong Nia, offer more than simple ghost stories. They provide unsettling glimpses into a world where the boundaries between the living and the spectral seemed unnervingly thin. The narratives recount experiences steeped in visceral fear and profound psychological distress. Uncle Nam's night began with the unsettling enigma of a silent boy guarding his catch, an encounter strange yet perhaps initially dismissible. However, the night rapidly descended into a phantasmagoria of terror: unnaturally large and bold rats with glowing red eyes, spectral cats emerging dry from the dampness only to vanish into water, the horrifying apparition of a phantom infant, and a terrifying swarm of ghostly children. His ordeal culminated not just in physical collapse but in the ultimate psychological horror, being seemingly rescued by a figure who then revealed itself to be the very embodiment of the terror he had fled. Seven Tam's journey, undertaken due to a simple miscalculation amplified by the deceptive brilliance of the full moon, unfolded as a different kind of haunting. He faced the unnerving persistence of a crawling, groaning entity, a figure drawn directly from local cautionary tales. His relief at its apparent dispatch by a large black dog proved cruelly illusory, as the canine protector itself transformed into a monstrous, shape-shifting entity at the infamous Rachjia Bridge before vanishing unnaturally. His final confrontation pitted him against the legendary white shadow of Tan Quy School, the tragic ghost of Miss Ut Lien, forcing him to rely on desperate wit rooted in folk belief to survive. These extraordinary encounters unfolded against the backdrop of a very specific time and place, the Long Kieng village region, adjacent yet culturally distinct from nearby Saigon, during the volatile decades from the 1930s to the 1950s. This was a landscape defined by its physical isolation, a world of sprawling rice paddies, intricate canal networks, and patches of untamed wilderness. Life was agrarian, demanding, and often precarious. The necessity of nocturnal activities like frog hunting or early market journeys forced individuals into solitary communion with the profound darkness of the countryside, far removed from the relative security of the village or the nascent electric glow of the distant city. This environment itself, isolated, shadowed, subject to the whims of nature and imbued with the sounds and silences of the deep night, undoubtedly fostered a mindset receptive to the possibility of the unseen, the unexplained. The pervasive darkness wasn't merely an absence of light, it was perceived as a different realm, one where known dangers mingled with the potential for spectral intrusion. Within these detailed accounts, several powerful themes resonate. Fear is paramount, not just the sudden terror of a ghostly apparition, but the deeper anxieties of isolation, vulnerability, and the loss of control when faced with forces beyond human comprehension. The solitude of the hunters and travelers is repeatedly emphasized, highlighting their exposure when separated from the collective safety of the community. The supernatural manifests in strikingly diverse forms, ranging from vaguely humanoid figures and child phantoms to spectral animals exhibiting unnatural characteristics and behaviors, and even disembodied lights or sounds. These entities are rarely passive. They pursue, they deceive, they attack, they instill debilitating fear, directly impacting the physical and psychological well-being of those they encounter. Furthermore, the narratives vividly illustrate the powerful intersection of personal experience and established local legends. Figures like the crawling ghost or the white shadow of Miss Lien were known entities within the community's folklore, providing a pre-existing framework, a name and a history, for the terrifying, otherwise inexplicable events experienced by individuals like Seven Tam. Understanding these tales requires acknowledging the profound role of folklore and belief within the Long Kieng community of that era. In such relatively isolated, traditional societies, folklore served multiple crucial functions. These stories were more than just entertainment, they acted as potent cautionary tales, reinforcing social norms and warning against dangerous behaviors like traveling alone at night or disrespecting sacred or haunted locations. They provided explanations, however terrifying, for misfortune, sudden illness, madness, or inexplicable phenomena that defied rational understanding within their worldview. They served as repositories of collective memory, encoding shared anxieties, historical traumas, like the violence underpinning the Miss Lien legend, and the community's complex relationship with the often unforgiving natural and potentially supernatural environments surrounding them. The deeply ingrained belief in the existence of spirits, hauntings, the power of curses or vengeful ghosts, and the general permeability of the veil between the world of the living and the realm of the dead shaped how villagers perceived and interpreted unusual or frightening occurrences. These narratives, therefore, stand as valuable cultural artifacts, reflecting a specific cosmology and a way of processing the mysteries and terrors of existence. The enduring power of these accounts, even viewed from a distance of decades and through a modern lens, is undeniable. They tap into universal human fears, the fear of the dark, the unknown, the loss of self, but root them in the specific cultural and historical soil of rural southern Vietnam in the mid-20th century. Their presentation as true ghost stories, as recounted experiences rather than deliberate fictions, lends them a particular weight and resonance. Chroniclers like Lo Hong Nia, by documenting these fragments of oral tradition, ensured that these echoes from the past, these whispers of fear and wonder, were not entirely lost to time. They form a significant, if unsettling, part of Vietnam's rich and multifaceted spectral heritage. Ultimately, as we step back from the chilling details of Uncle Nam's collapse and Seven Tam's desperate flight, we are left contemplating the lingering power of these narratives. Presented as factual accounts within the context of their origin, their ultimate objective, truth, remains veiled by time, memory, and the inherent subjectivity of belief. Were these genuine intrusions of the supernatural, or were they products of fear, isolation, fatigue, and a culturally conditioned readiness to perceive the spectral in the shadows? Perhaps the question itself misses the point. What remains undeniably real is the terror experienced by the individuals, the impact these encounters had on their lives, and the enduring role such stories played in shaping the collective imagination and anxieties of the Long Kieng community. The lingering chill emanating from these tales is a potent reminder of a time when the night was deeper, the world felt wilder, and the ghosts of the past walked uneasily alongside the living.